His hands found my waist before I could even catch my breath. The garden hose slipped from my grip, water soaking through my shirt, making the fabric cling to my skin. I should have stepped back, should have laughed it off, but the way Sophie's eyes lingered on me through her kitchen window made everything feel different. Her husband Chris was at work, the neighborhood was quiet, and she was watching me like she'd been waiting for this moment all summer. The water kept running, pooling at my feet as I stood there, shirt transparent, feeling exposed under her gaze. She didn't look away. If anything, she leaned closer to the window, her lips parting slightly as her eyes traced the lines of my body. I felt a rush of heat that had nothing to do with the Florida sun beating down on my back. That's when she opened her back door and stepped outside. Hey, if you're already hooked by this opening, do me a quick favor and hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to see where this goes, and I promise it gets way more intense. Let's continue. You look like you could use some help, Sophie called out, walking across her yard toward the fence that separated our properties. She moved with purpose, her sundress swaying with each step, the thin fabric doing little to hide the curves underneath. I reached for the hose, trying to turn off the water, but my hands were shaking slightly. Just watering the garden, I managed, though we both knew that wasn't what this was about anymore. She stopped at the fence line, close enough that I could smell her perfume mixing with the scent of summer flowers. Your shirt's soaked, she observed, her voice carrying a note I'd never heard before, not the polite neighbor tone she used when Chris was around. Yeah, I noticed. I finally got control of the hose, but the damage was done. The white t-shirt clung to my chest, leaving nothing to the imagination. Sophie's eyes didn't waver. You should probably get out of those wet clothes before you catch cold. The irony wasn't lost on me. It was 90 degrees in the shade. Maybe you're right, I said, testing the waters, seeing how far this moment would stretch. She glanced back toward her house, then at mine. Chris's car wasn't in the driveway, wouldn't be for hours. We both knew his schedule by now after living next to each other for 2 years. My air conditioning's better than yours, she said softly. If you want to dry off. The invitation hung between us, loaded with possibility and danger in equal measure. I'd noticed Sophie before, of course. Hard not to notice a woman like her. The way she tended her garden in the early mornings, how she'd wave from her window. When I left for work, the occasional conversations over the fence about mundane neighborhood things. But this was different. This was her crossing a line we'd both been dancing around all summer. Chris won't be home until after 6, she added, as if reading my thoughts. I looked at her standing there, sunlight catching the golden highlights in her hair, her skin warm and inviting. The rational part of my mind screamed warnings, but my body was already responding to the invitation in her voice. 5 minutes, I heard myself say. Just to dry off. Her smile was slow, knowing. Of course, just to dry off. I followed her across both yards, my wet shirt clinging uncomfortably to my skin. Sophie's house was cool and dim compared to the bright heat outside. She led me through the back door into their kitchen, the same layout as mine, but somehow feeling completely different. Let me get you a towel, she said, but instead of leaving the room, she moved closer. Her fingers touched the hem of my soaked shirt. This needs to come off. The air between us crackled with tension. I could feel my pulse, quickening as she helped lift the fabric over my head, her hands brushing against my skin in the process. The shirt hit the floor with a wet slap. Better? She asked, but her voice was breathier now. Her pupils dilated as she looked at me. Much better. I was acutely aware of how close she was standing, how the thin straps of her sundress had slipped, slightly off her shoulders. Sophie reached up, her palm flat against my chest, feeling the rapid beat of my heart. You're warm, she murmured. So are you. The pretense was falling away piece by piece. We weren't neighbors anymore, weren't making polite conversation. We were a man and a woman alone in a house, the summer heat making everything feel languid and inevitable. Her hand trailed lower, fingers tracing the lines of muscle along my stomach. I sucked in a sharp breath, my body responding immediately to her touch. Sophie, I started, but she pressed a finger to my lips. Shh, don't think, just feel. And then she was kissing me. Soft at first, tentative, testing my response. But when I kissed her back, when my hands found her waist and pulled her closer, something ignited between us. The kiss deepened, became hungrier, more desperate. My hands roamed over the thin fabric of her dress, feeling the warmth of her skin underneath. She pressed against me, her body soft and willing, a quiet moan escaping her lips as I traced the curve of her spine. Not here, she whispered against my mouth. The living room. She took my hand and led me through the house. The living room was spacious, comfortable, filled with the life she shared with Chris. Family photos on the mantel, his golf clubs in the corner, their wedding picture on the side table. I should have felt guilty, should have stopped this before it went any further. But when Sophie turned to face me, when she reached for the straps of her dress and let them slide down her arms, all rational thought disappeared. The dress pooled at her feet, leaving her in delicate undergarments that highlighted every curve. She was beautiful, confident, completely in control of the moment. Your turn, she said, her voice husky with desire. I didn't hesitate. My shorts joined her dress on the floor, leaving us both exposed, vulnerable, electric with anticipation. Sophie, moved toward me, her hands exploring my chest, my shoulders, mapping every inch of skin with deliberate slowness. When she pressed her lips to my neck, I felt a shiver run through my entire body. "I've been watching you," she confessed, her breath warm against my ear. "Every morning when you work in your garden, every time you come home from your runs. I've been wondering what it would feel like to touch you." Her honesty was intoxicating. "I've been watching you too," I admitted, wondering the same thing. She pulled back to look at me, her eyes dark with desire. "Show me." I didn't need to be asked twice. My hands cupped her face as I kissed her deeply, pouring all the months of stolen glances and whispered fantasies into that connection. She responded eagerly, her body molding against mine as we sank onto the couch. The leather was cool against our heated skin as Sophie straddled me, her movements slow and deliberate. Every touch, every caress was loaded with the weight of forbidden desire. She moved like she'd been thinking about this moment as long as I had, like she knew exactly what she wanted. My hands traced the curve of her hips, feeling the subtle tremor that ran through her as I touched her. She arched against me, a soft gasp escaping her lips as our bodies found their rhythm. "You feel so good," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Better than I imagined." The words sent a jolt through me. I pulled her closer, deeper, losing myself in the sensation of her warmth, her softness, the way she moved with such perfect synchronization. Time seemed to slow as we moved together, building towards something that felt both inevitable and dangerous. The afternoon light filtered through the curtains, casting everything in a golden glow that made the moment feel dreamlike, suspended in time. Sophie's breathing grew more ragged, her movements more urgent. I could feel the tension building in her body, see it in the way her head fell back, her lips parted in silent pleasure. "Don't stop," she breathed, her fingers digging into my shoulders. "Please don't stop." I had no intention of stopping. This moment, this connection, it felt like everything I'd been missing without knowing it. The way she responded to my touch, the sounds she made, the complete abandonment in her movements. It was intoxicating. As the waves of sensation built between us, I caught a glimpse of our reflection in the glass coffee table. Two bodies intertwined, lost in each other, completely forgetting the world outside. The sight only intensified everything I was feeling. Sophie's rhythm quickened, her breath coming in short gasps as she moved with increasing urgency. I matched. Her pace, our bodies finding perfect synchronization, building toward a crescendo that felt earth-shattering. When the moment finally crashed over us, it was with an intensity that left us both trembling. Sophie collapsed against my chest, her body shaking with aftershocks, her breath warm against my neck. For long minutes we stayed like that, holding each other as our breathing slowly returned to normal. The reality of what we'd done began to seep back in, but neither of us moved to break the connection. "That was," Sophie started, then trailed off, apparently as lost for words as I was. "Incredible," I finished for her. She lifted her head to look at me, her hair tousled, her lips swollen from our kisses. What happens now? It was the question I'd been dreading. What did happen now? How did we go back to being neighbors? How did we pretend this hadn't changed everything? "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "But I don't regret it." She smiled, soft and sad at the same time. "Neither do I, but Chris." The mention of her husband's name brought reality crashing back. He'd be home in a few hours, would be sitting on this same couch, maybe kissing her on these same lips that had just been pressed against mine. "He can't know," Sophie said, voicing what we were both thinking. "He won't, not from me." She nodded, then slowly disentangled herself from my embrace. We dressed in silence, the weight of our secret settling between us. When we were both decent, again she walked me to the door. "Thank you," she said softly, her hand briefly touching mine, "for making me feel alive again." The words stayed with me as I walked back to my own house, as I showered and tried to wash away the evidence of our afternoon together. But I couldn't wash away the memory of her touch, the sound of her voice, the way she'd looked at me like I was everything she'd been missing. That evening, I heard Chris's car in the driveway, heard their voices through the thin walls, normal conversation about his day at work, what they wanted for dinner. I wondered if he could tell if there was something different about her that would give us away. The next morning, I was in my garden again, watering the same plants, when I felt eyes on me. I looked up to see Sophie at her kitchen window, watching me with the same intensity as before. But now there was something else in her gaze: knowledge, memory, desire. She raised her coffee mug in a small salute, a secret greeting meant just for me. I found myself smiling, returning the gesture with a small wave of my own. 2 days later, Chris invited me over for a barbecue. "Just the three of us," he said, friendly as always. "Sophie's been saying we should get to know our neighbors better." I accepted, curious and terrified in equal measure about how Sophie and I would handle being in the same space with her husband present. The barbecue was torture and temptation rolled into one. Sophie played the perfect hostess, bringing drinks, making conversation, acting completely normal. But I caught the stolen glances, the way her fingers lingered when she handed me a beer, the subtle brush of her hand against mine when she passed behind my chair. Chris was oblivious, talking about work and sports and neighborhood gossip. He had no idea that his wife and I shared a secret that could destroy his world. You two seem to be getting along well, he observed at one point, watching Sophie laugh at something I'd said. We're good neighbors, Sophie replied smoothly, but her eyes met mine over his head, and I saw the heat still burning there. As the evening wound down, as Chris started cleaning up the grill, Sophie found a moment to get close to me. I can't. Stop thinking about the other day, she whispered, her voice so quiet only I could hear. Neither can I. Chris is going out of town next weekend, a golf trip with his buddies. The implication hung in the air between us. Another opportunity, another chance to explore this dangerous connection we discovered. Sophie, I started, but she shook her head. Just think about it, she said, then moved away as Chris returned. I spent the rest of the week thinking about little else. The rational part of my mind kept listing all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Chris was a good man, a good neighbor. Sophie was married, committed to someone else. This could ruin lives, destroy families, change everything. But the other part of my mind, the part that remembered how she felt in my arms, how she'd looked at me with such complete desire, that part was already counting the days until Chris left town. Friday evening, I watched from my window as Chris loaded his golf clubs into his car. He hugged Sophie goodbye, kissed her on the cheek, and drove away into the sunset. The neighborhood fell quiet, leaving just Sophie and me with the weight of possibility between us. I waited until after dark to see the text message. He's gone. If you want to come over. I stared at the phone for a long time, knowing that if I walked across those 2 yards, if I knocked on her door, there would be no going back. This wouldn't be a moment of weakness anymore. It would be a choice, a deliberate decision to pursue something that could only end in complications. But as I looked out my window and saw her silhouette in her living room, saw her waiting for me to make my choice, I knew what I was going to do. Some lines, once crossed, change everything. But maybe sometimes that's exactly what we need. Have you ever been tempted by something you knew you shouldn't want? What would you have done in my situation, walked away, or followed your desire wherever it led? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know your thoughts. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell because, trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. This story is just getting started.